from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
President Trump has already filed the appeal. Welcome to the Wednesday edition as the president responds to a judge temporarily blocking his attempt to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook within hours of the Senate committee, the banking committee, advancing Stephen Miran's nomination to the Fed. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in for Kaylee Lines today in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kriti, reshaping the Fed is the backdrop today, as we now understand, to this new PPI data. We've got a lot to talk about.
We've got a lot to talk about. We're, I want to say, 8 days away from the Federal Reserve meeting this month, and we still don't know who's going to be in that meeting.
Well, that's true. We have a better sense, though, of who might be there as Stephen Miran's nomination advances. We expect a full floor vote on Monday, so he could presumably, if they pull this off timing-wise, make it to the meeting. And Lisa Cook, as for now, maintains her job. This new appeal is pretty interesting timing, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fascinating. But still, at the end of the day, from a market's perspective, these are still two doves that are going to be in the room. Does it really move the dial that much from a policy perspective?
When it comes to outcomes, probably not, which is why Wall Street seems to be not terribly bothered by all of this. And that's where we start our conversation. We'll get an update from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall on the way. Charlie Pellet is first, though, with his eyes on the markets in the Wednesday trade. He's live at World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, how's it look?
Good day. We are looking at a record right now on the S&P 500 index. Do want to begin with Klarna, though. That IPO, indeed, the largest IPO of 2025. Klarna now indicated to open at $52 to $53. The IPO priced at $40. It is a buy now, pay later company, and indeed, we will be keeping you updated once we see Klarna shares up and running. I mentioned that record. S&P right now, right to the numbers at 65.39. We're up 26 on the S&P. That is a gain of 0.4%. On track for another record close here. The Dow, though, retreating. Dow Industrials down 231 right now, down 0.5%. NASDAQ up 63, up 0.3%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 0.2%. One big stock making a big move today, and that is Oracle, surging 39.4% after earnings. Right now, we have got the 10-year on this PPI Wednesday, 4.03%. The 2-year, 3.52%. Spot gold up $16 the ounce, up by about 0.4%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up by 2.1%, 63.94 for a barrel of WTI. So bottom line here, traders driving stocks higher, bond yields lower as an unexpected decline in inflation reinforces bets that the Fed will resume cutting interest rates in September. Tomorrow morning, of course, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time, we get the Consumer Price Index. So again, we are awaiting Klarna to start trading, keeping an eye on Oracle. That stock up by 39.5%. Balance of Power continues right now. Back, we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Kriti Gupta and Joe Mathieu.
Appreciate that, Charlie Pellet. We'll be back with Charlie in about 20 minutes to update markets as we watch Oracle go to the moon. And yes, we wait for an IPO to start trading here. It's going to be a really interesting story once Klarna starts trading with a lot of interest, Kriti, in this new issue. It's been quite the pop for IPOs lately, specifically those geared toward AI, or in this case, pay as you go. What's the word I'm looking for?
Buy now, pay later.
Buy now, pay later. Yeah, exactly.
Klarna's fascinating because the CEO, Sebastian, made a really big splash about saying AI is the future of the workforce, to the point that he laid off a bunch of people to prove that point. So is this a stock that is ultimately AI? Is this a fintech? Is this a financial services? It kind of wears multiple hats. We'll see if it doesn't even matter.
They like to be called a digital bank, which is interesting when we talk about this. But when you're competing with a firm, you get a lot of attention on Wall Street, and something that we'll be talking about. As soon as it starts trading, we'll have that for you. With our eyes, of course, on the White House as well and the Federal Reserve. Kriti and I were just discussing this. The reshaping of the Fed might actually come to fruition in time for next week's meeting, with Lisa Cook staying, Stephen Miran coming. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent, is with us here in our D.C. bureau. Tyler, it looks like both of these are likely, though we just got an appeal filed here. Could the president change this yet?
Right. Well, I mean, this appeal was widely expected, right, after we had seen that this judge said that Lisa Cook could retain her job while the broader legal issue of her firing plays out in court. Now, of course, we know that the Department of Justice has been arguing here that President Trump has sufficient cause to fire Lisa Cook. In fact, this White House says that really the court should defer to the presidency to determine what counts as sufficient cause in order to remove a Fed official. But there's a few different things that I wanted to pull from the decision that we heard from the judge yesterday. One is that she said that she thinks Cook will be very likely to succeed in her case, that President Trump overstepped his authority when it came to the Federal Reserve Act. And the judge also said that she thinks that Cook wasn't entitled to due process. She wasn't given the due process. Her rights were violated in that way. Of course, as you well know, this White House has repeatedly argued that Cook was given due process because there were 5 days between President Trump posting that she should resign and then ultimately posting her termination letter.
So what happens now from a time frame perspective? I mean, again, 7 days away to the next Federal Reserve meeting or Federal Reserve decision. The meeting's on the 16th, so 6 days away. There's a weekend in between that. When do we get an answer of who's actually in the room?
So at this point, it is unclear how quickly this appeals court would rule. As of now, Lisa Cook is able to retain her seat, but that could switch if this court takes it up faster than that. Ultimately, though, we're watching for this to really go to the Supreme Court, right? This is going to get appealed again, no matter how it shakes out on the next level. And that's really what we're going to be watching for. It's worth noting, of course, that the courts recently have been perhaps weakening the protections of these officials in these independent agencies. But then back in May, we did get that really important carve out, that ruling where the court essentially signaled that they would shield Fed officials, that the Fed is a special case, a unique case, in their words.
Well, yeah, indeed. The president may not see it that way. However, but I think Kriti's made the point that regardless, it's not going to change the outcome likely of this Federal Reserve meeting. There will still be persistent questions about Stephen Miran returning to work at the White House, though. This is only a 4.5-month stint. He'll be on unpaid leave, according to the advice of counsel. That's what he's going to do. But in the end here, President Trump's still going to be his boss, right? Doesn't he have to consider what he does in the next 4 months?
Well, this has been one of the arguments really brought up against him. We saw it really highlighted, come to the forefront of the conversation last week when he was giving his public testimony on Capitol Hill, because our understanding is Stephen Miran is going to take this unpaid leave from his job heading the White House's Council of Economic Advisors, because this role, as you're saying, only goes until January. Ultimately, though, he was able to convince enough Republicans to get over the finish line today. This vote was widely expected to go in Miran's favor. We had all caught up with the Senate Banking Chair, Tim Scott, yesterday. He seemed pretty confident. And now we're expecting a vote on Monday, and that would lead to the final floor vote. Really important to note, Republicans are going to have to overcome a few different procedural hurdles here in order to actually get this over the finish line. But at this point, it's looking pretty likely. Monday, of course, one day before the FOMC meeting starts. He can only lose 4 Republicans. At this point, we haven't gotten any indications that any of them are going to vote against him.
Fascinating. Boy, there's a lot to talk about with Tyler today. Tyler, Kendall, thank you so much. We'll be looking for that Monday vote, of course. It was a squeaker in committee. It was cleared by 2 votes. The ranking member, the top Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee, Elizabeth Warren, was not in favor, as you might expect, of this passage. She made that clear during his confirmation hearing and just before the vote earlier today. Listen.
Mr. Chairman, we should not be voting today on Dr. Miran's nomination to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. President Trump is trying to seize personal control of the Fed in an attempt to escape accountability for his own economic failures. Dr. Miran's nomination is just the next phase of President Trump's very public, months-long campaign to stack the Fed with loyalists. Dr. Miran has already spectacularly failed every independence test that we could think of.
Senator Warren from earlier today. Again, Stephen Miran's nomination advances, and we expect a vote on Monday. Klarna is open. The IPO that we were talking about, Kriti, has just opened for trading and moving higher. We're above $52, up about 32% already in the first moment or two of trading. This is the company we were just talking to, framing itself as a digital bank, and the latest new issue on Wall Street to take off with high volume and high interest here, Kriti. This is really doing something.
Yeah, an almost 30% jump right out of the gates. Is the IPO market back after being kind of dormant for a little bit? Klarna is really the test of that. If an AI-esque tech payments company can't do it. Can anyone else?
Well, great question. This is a rival of Affirm, which of course has been a darling on Wall Street. The buy now, pay later market had priced its initial public offering above the expected range at 34.3 million shares. $40 a share is where we came in here. KLAR, the ticker on the New York Stock Exchange, and watching the advance here before our eyes, up holding pretty steady at up 30% or so above $52. We're going to talk to a couple of experts about this in just a moment at World Headquarters in New York. Kristine Aquino, Kriti, our managing editor for Bloomberg Markets Live, will be with us alongside Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg News equities reporter. It's a busy day for them.
It absolutely is. Klarna, I think, it's just worth taking a beat here because Klarna, yes, it's a buy now, pay later firm.
Yeah.
Yes, it already has a competitor in the works. It's an AI firm a little bit as well. I really think the labor story is such a key one with Klarna. It's the one that the CEO, Sebastian, has really been known for in terms of leaning into AI. Earlier, I was telling Bloomberg Television that their headcount, get this, has dropped from 7,400 people to just 3,000. That's how much she believes in that rhetoric.
Is that in advance of AI improving the level of productivity, or is it because of the implementation of AI?
I think he's been saying it's because of, but it's in real preparation for the idea that this is the future, that AI can do more than an average human can.
Pretty incredible. Keeping in mind that Klarna operates largely in Europe, while its chief rival that we've already identified as a firm has its main market here in the U.S. We're up about 28% now, just above $51 here. Klarna shares up in its trading debut here, a $1.37 billion IPO. And a remarkable move here in the opening moments of trading. As you mentioned, if it's in the AI world, you're probably going to get a lot of attention on Wall Street. And look no further than Oracle today. It's lifting the entire sector following its earnings last night.
Oh my gosh, massive. But Joe, as you know, I'm here on assignment from London and from Europe, where we've been covering Klarna quite significantly. And there's a scandal in Europe right now that Klarna chose to IPO in New York instead of in London or instead of in Frankfurt, when they're really trying to see a little bit of love there. So Klarna making waves in the U.S.,
yes, right.
But perhaps turning a cold shoulder to Europe at the moment.
Well, let's bring in Kristine Aquino, as I mentioned, managing editor for Bloomberg Markets Live, watching all this unfold before our eyes. Kristine, it's great to have you with us at World Headquarters in New York. We were just remarking on the string of successful IPOs against the backdrop of AI that this market has seen. Where's the money coming from, and what do you make of this advance?
Yeah, Joe, I mean, seems like the money is coming from just about everywhere. And that really attests to the fact that the AI trade in general is still going strong. And a lot of investors still want to get into it, right? You have everything from private equity, retail investors really trying to get into this. And, just speaking about Klarna specifically, there was a lot of interest, again, from private equity investors kind of wanting to get into that buy now, pay later space. And also just in general, this sort of alternative banking space that Klarna is also trying to branch out into beyond its buy now, pay later business. And because of this whole interest in technologically aligned companies, seems like that's what Klarna is enjoying the success of at the moment.
Well, Kristine, take a step back for us here, if you will. As I was talking about earlier, the IPO market's been dormant for a little bit. Maybe dormant is a strong term, but definitely not the kind of excitement of 2021, perhaps, that we saw in the IPO market. Is this the canary in the coal mine? Is this basically a corporate dipping their toe into the water? Could this open the floodgates for others?
Yeah, interesting, Kriti. I mean, it is certainly an environment that is potentially more supportive for deals like Klarna coming to market, particularly from a regulatory standpoint, right? I think the sense on Wall Street and just corporates in general, since President Trump was elected into a second term, is that regulation for a lot of these sort of deal activities, whether it's M&A or companies becoming public, it's going to be a lot easier, and there are lower barriers to entry. And that's definitely something that we've seen just in terms of the amount of IPOs that we've seen this year, and also the amount of deals generally that we've seen in that space. And so, in terms of whether it's a canary in the coal mine, it remains to be seen. I'm sure that the environment for expectations for lower interest rates definitely helping here as well. But of course, the naysayers will say, well, there's always kind of the flip side, negative of lower interest rates kind of lulling people into a false sense of security. But for now, it seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm.
Kristine, I just want to ask you lastly about how much cash is on the sidelines right now, because we're seeing a lot of stocks move higher today, and specifically in this space. It's not like people are selling NVIDIA to buy this IPO. Does it suggest that we're still keeping powder dry?
Yeah, I mean, Joe, I think there certainly seems to be more money to be deployed. Very interestingly, actually, based on some measures, there are some indications that perhaps some investors have actually offloaded on equities over the last few months, just given all the uncertainty surrounding tariff policy and whatnot. And so, there is a sense that, they're coming back because we're once again seeing the S&P 500 hitting records after taking a bit of a pullback in the second quarter. And so there's definitely that perspective as well. And, a lot of expectations, once again, that this rally could have legs into year end, because now we have Fed policy that's more supportive coming into the equation. And so, certainly the winds seem to be blowing towards a more optimistic end to 2025, at least for stocks.
Well, I'm glad you could join us, Kristine, as ever. Kristine Aquino, and I hope I didn't pull you away from the blog for too long, managing editor for Bloomberg Markets Live, punching this up right now with the IPO, Kriti, that keeps on rising, although we're pulling back a bit from our highs. I just looked down after about a moment, up 19% now to trade just above $47. Still likely successful, but not at our highs of the day, at least. We've got a lot more to talk about as we keep our eyes on the IPO, and we'll get back to this a little bit later on this hour. It's PPI day, of course. One of the bigger stories that we've been following is wholesale inflation declines unexpectedly in August for the first time in 4 months. And Ernie Tedeschi is with us right now to talk about this and a lot more. Director of Economics at the Yale Budget Lab, former chief economist at the Council of Economic Advisors. Ernie, it's great to have you back. The president was on Truth Social talking about the PPI data. He says, just out, no inflation, 3 exclamation points. Too late, referring to Jay Powell must lower the rate big right now. Is he right? No inflation?
So, the PPI was softer and weaker than expected. That is absolutely true. I think that, when you open up the hood, there's a little bit more to be concerned with here, right? So a lot of the weakness was because of retail and wholesale margins being weak, which are, valuable data in PPI, but, it's an incomplete measure of margins. It's not, sort of the gospel truth about what's happening with profits right now. When you look at things like intermediate goods, so the input costs into business, which is not what headline PPI tells us about, but there is a sub-index that tells us about this. Those prices have been accelerating. So intermediate input costs for goods that are about to be sold to the final consumer grew 3.1% over the last 12 months, which, if you ignore the pandemic, is the highest since 2018. So there's some signs of acceleration there. There is also some signs of acceleration in final goods prices for consumer goods as well, which may be in part driven by tariff costs.
Well, Ernie, that's exactly where I was going to go next. Last month's figures on the PPI story was really felt like the first sign, or at least from a Wall Street perspective, that the tariff policy was finally showing up in the data after a couple of months of it not doing so. How does this now feed into the PCE data that the Fed more closely watches?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So look, PPI is a complicated jumble. It's a great data source. But one thing that everybody needs to keep in mind is that PPI does not include direct imports. So, direct to consumer imports, like made in Japan, made in China goods are not counted in PPI. They do affect seller prices in the sense that, if input costs go up, that can affect PPI down the line. But it's only a partial sense of, how tariffs are affecting things. I think CPI and PCE overall are much better measures, at least to look at the consumer impact of tariffs. And there we see very clear signs, especially among durable goods, appliances, electronics, furniture, that durable goods have been, that their prices have been rising faster than they did last year. They're up more than 2% against pre-2025 trend, whereas durable goods prices fell over the same period in 2024 by this point. So there's clearly some consumer pass-through happening as a result of tariffs. It's mainly affecting durable goods prices, obviously not services.
You know, Ernie, we were talking to Liz Pancotti about this just the other day. The fact she said that all the front loading that we saw before tariffs took effect are still the goods largely that we're buying, that starting shortly, all tariffed goods will begin hitting shelves, and it could have a real impact on the holiday shopping season. Do you have that same expectation for, say, the next 3 months?
Yeah, there are all sorts of factors that are sort of delaying and shifting when we see tariffs fully biting. One of which is the inventory issue, especially with apparel. Apparel ought to be one of the most sensitive categories of goods, the tariffs, but we haven't seen, outsized price increases in apparel so far. I think that's because retailers and manufacturers stocked up on apparel beforehand, but eventually that's going to run out as we burn through inventories. We could see some effects as soon as tomorrow's CPI report with August, because when you think about the goods that are the most affected by tariffs, you think electronics, household supplies, and apparel, which are back to school items, right? And, which is what, the period that we just went through in August. But if we don't see much of an effect, I have the same worry that as we get closer to the holiday shopping season in November and December, there won't be any more sort of cushion for companies to absorb these tariffs anymore.
Ernie, you mentioned it there, the CPI report tomorrow. Let's push forward to that. In the last report, we saw shelter prices really feeding in a big, big way. Talk to us about the housing story in America right now, because on the one hand, you hear just monumental increases in New York, LA, Miami even, but then you look at your second tier cities and they're starting to come down. What do you make of that widening gap?
Yeah, the first thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to CPI or PCE, there's just a lag between, the rents that you see in these cities or the housing prices that you see in these cities and their effect on the published CPI and PCE data. There's a lag of about 12 months. So that's, number one. Number two, we have a housing shortage in America, and it's particularly severe in large coastal cities right now. At the same time, there's less churn in the housing market than there has been in the past, in part because of high interest rates, that are still weighing on housing churn. I think that next year, in terms of CPI and PCE, we could start seeing more upward pressure on that component, of CPI and PCE, which is, potentially going to be concerning for the Fed. Right now, the housing component of CPI and PCE, at least as of last month, we'll see what happens tomorrow, has been relatively tame. And in fact, in the July CPI, the housing component of CPI was basically back at pre-pandemic levels, whereas housing had been a much more top tier driver of, the inflation overshoot that we had seen in 2022 and 2023.
Yeah, interesting, Ernie. We're talking right now about the potential for a government shutdown at the end of this month, and that wouldn't typically have a real impact on the economy. But I wonder if we had a record shutdown, and they're talking about the possibility of something going months, not weeks, into potentially the new year, because there would be no off-ramp, for instance, and the president, the administration would have a lot of leeway over the amount of money that was spent, the number of workers who would be allowed to come in each day. Would a protracted shutdown measured by months have an economic impact, or would it dampen consumer spending?
I think it would have a non-zero impact on the economy. I distinguish between two different things: a government shutdown and a debt ceiling crisis, right? In terms of political shocks. Debt ceiling crisis is just on a whole other tier. In terms of its impact on markets, impact on the economy. We've looked at government shutdowns in the past, both us and, lots of different economists. And it's really hard to see a discernible impact. And what impact there is quickly reverses itself once the shutdown ends. And that's particularly true of recent shutdowns, because it used to be that government workers weren't necessarily guaranteed back pay. And that law has changed where now they are guaranteed back pay. And so now it's just a matter of you're waiting it out, and then, they're made whole when the shutdown ends. That doesn't mean that there's no impact. If I had to put it in GDP terms, I might put it at, the equivalent of 0.3 percentage points off of growth for every month that a shutdown goes on, right? Like, which is, again, non-zero, but then that quickly corrects itself when the shutdown ends. So, you know, if I'm in very short run markets, it should affect my strategy. But if I'm in any sort of medium term market, it's irrelevant.
Got it. Ernie, it's great to have you back. Ernie Tedeschi is director of economics at the Yale Budget Lab, where they do great work, and everybody's in love with the dinosaur. Ernie, come back and see us soon. Pretty soon, you're going to start seeing the countdown clocks on cable news channels, countdown to a shutdown or whatever they're going to call it. Here we are again, September 30th, the government would presumably run out of money. Well, it would run out of money unless we have a deal to fund the government. And it's not getting easier. It's actually getting worse. The Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, now pouring cold water on the idea of the one potential chip it looked like they had to throw to Democrats here, extending enhanced Obamacare premium tax credits set to expire the end of the year. We've been talking to lawmakers about this every day lately, and most Republicans seemed like they were on board with some kind of conversation here, at least. John Thune wants Democrats to accept a clean CR, he says. And Hakeem Jeffries says, no thanks. We heard from the Democratic leader in the House a short time ago. Let's listen.
In March, House Democrats strongly opposed the partisan Republican spending bill that hurt everyday Americans in a variety of ways, including making their health care more expensive. A continuing resolution that continues the failed policies of the Republican Party that we voted against is not the type of policy that actually meets the needs of the American people.
So we're not getting closer to a deal. We may be getting further away from one. And we all remember how that went in March for Chuck Schumer. He may not be prepared to do that again and split with the Democrats in the House. Let's assemble our political panel for their take on this and a lot more. Rick Davis is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital, as we add the voice today of Ofirah Yheskel, director of external affairs at the Democratic Governors Association. Great to have both of you here. Ofirah, where's your heart on this? When Democrats say another rescission, we're not going to play ball, we can't trust those who are working on the other side of the aisle, and it's not going to be a clean CR. If it's not the Obamacare extension, what is it? Or are you really bracing for a shutdown?
Well, I think Republicans seem dead set on running on the fact that they're going to raise people's health care costs, and far be it from me to stop them. And we're seeing that, too, with the One Big Beautiful Bill already taking a role in the Virginia governor election that's less than 60 days away, where we're already starting to see rural health care clinics in Virginia stand up and say, we're going to have to close our doors, specifically citing the One Big Beautiful Bill. And Trump's day one promise, as we all remember, was that he was going to lower costs for the American people. Every single action I see the Trump administration taking, and Republicans in Congress, seems designed to do the opposite, to send healthcare costs skyrocketing. These tariffs have been a mess. And so I think there's really a hard case for Republicans to make that they're going to lower costs for people and do daily work for them in their everyday lives.
Rick, weigh in here. If they don't have the Democrats on board, how do the Republicans fund the government?
Well, without Democratic support in the United States Senate, you can't fund the government. You've got to have 60 votes overall. Republicans got 52. They're going to need some supplements. And in the past, they've been able to cut deals with Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer cut a deal last time there was going to be a government shutdown, and his party beat him up pretty hard. And I would guess right now there is almost no way after Leader Thune closed the door on an ACA insurance extension to get Schumer in. And so I think Republicans are pretty sanguine about it. They're not in sell mode. They're out selling the Big Beautiful Bill or whatever it's being called this week. And I think their attitude is we can say that Democrats are the reason that we are going to have a government shutdown, so we're just going to blame it on them. And I must admit, I mean, I just think Democrats are missing an opportunity here. They should be out just campaigning hard on this. Why is it a bad thing to shut down government? I mean, the Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, that press conference was about as boring as watching mud flow down the side of a creek. I mean, like, it's unbelievable that they are out there thinking somehow they can sleepwalk into a shutdown and it not be their fault. I mean, it's always going to be the fault of the opposition party. But if they're going to do it anyway, go out there and make hay about it and talk about how it's important and on the policies that they want to depend upon. I don't get it.
Ofirah, you ready to strike up the band?
Well, I mean, Republicans have full control of Washington. Let's not forget that. And they were actually interested in a common sense solution. They would reach across the aisle and talk to Democrats. I know we're forgetting that we can talk to people on the other side of the aisle about how to work together and get things done for the American people.
Not so much these days.
That's a reminder.
There's going to be a blame game, though, right? Not everybody's in the cycle like we are talking about. Well, you had the pocket rescissions. Most people don't even know what the heck that is. Do Democrats need to start kind of laying the groundwork, I think, as Rick is suggesting, to start pointing fingers here and let people know what the score is today?
Well, I think Republicans are already going to start feeling this blowback sooner than later, whether it is on the One Big Beautiful Bill or whatever they decide to do here on the funding measure. And again, in Virginia, people are already bracing for the fact that they're going to lose their health care through these Medicaid cuts. And once again, I think people are starting to understand that who your governor is really does matter, because Winsome Sears, who's a Republican nominee, has not said a word. She's been very silent on this. So I think if we're calling in the question of who leaders are right now and who's actually fighting for people, I think Democrats up and down at every level are the ones who are doing that.
So if not the subsidies, then what gets us across the finish line from a Democratic point of view?
I would hope the subsidies are on the table. We're talking about people losing their health care, and health care costs are going up. And I think that's a fact of life. We're seeing that not just on health care. Like I said, the cost of living is going up every day. I don't think Republicans have shown in any way that they're dedicated to addressing that. And we're seeing that again with the One Big Beautiful Bill. And I would remind everybody, they ripped away Medicaid coverage so they could fund a tax cut for billionaires in this country. That's something I will be saying every single day between now and up until the midterms. And I think that's a really strong message for Democrats to run with.
Just want to mention a breaking news headline on the terminal here. Mexico seeking to raise the tariff on cars from China. Yes, and Asia to 50%, something that the president had asked for, and a story that we'll keep our eyes on here. Rick, I have to ask you about your home state of Virginia before we're done here, because it's come up a couple of times. Ofirah has mentioned the governor's race. There was a special election just yesterday, a congressional seat once held by Jerry Conley, and his former staffer, James Walkinshaw, took a 50-point victory in this district. This is not a bellwether, though, right? Should we read into this on a national level, or was that a slam dunk no matter what for a Democrat?
It's been almost 2 decades since a Republican won in that district. My old friend, Tom Davis, no relation whatsoever. But at the end of the day, it does show that Democrats are able to create some excitement in a district that is pretty lopsided. And I would say candidates matter in this case. Walkinshaw is a very popular Fairfax County supervisor. That's a great platform to run for Congress on. And I would say, that same rule applies to the governor's race. I mean, Abigail Spanberger is a great get. I would say right now, Democrats are getting the candidates they want, and Republicans are getting the candidates that they can get. And as Mitch McConnell said over and over, you can run all the best campaigns you want, but the candidate matters the most, and I totally agree with that.
Candidate quality, what a concept. Rick Davis, great to have you as always. Bloomberg Politics contributor Ofirah Yheskel from the Democratic Governors Association. Thank you so much for the insights and joining our conversation here on Balance of Power. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Mathieu. We turn to geopolitics next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg. Klarna off its highs of the session, but still up about 19% at the moment. Bailey Lipschultz is watching it with us as well from World Headquarters in New York, Bloomberg News equities reporter. Bailey, we're still holding positive here, and the IPO did start trading above the price last evening. How do we qualify this up 20% in a world of CoreWeaves and other IPOs we've seen recently?
I think so far it's a success. The big question is, where does it close, and then where does it trade a week from now? As you mentioned, we have a number of stocks like Figma and Circle that have opened up tremendously higher. Even Bullish opened up 143% above its IPO price, but have pulled back from those peaks. So keeping an eye on, is there going to be a floor right now around $48? What does this look like come 4 p.m.? And then what does it look like when we have 5 more deals pricing and trading in the next 2 days?
Sure.
Bailey, is this if Klarna is a success story, does this mean that IPOs are officially back? What does that IPO market look like, and what does Klarna say about it?
Klarna is a deal, Kriti, that we've been waiting for. So they were supposed to go back in April, then Trump's tariffs kind of threw that into the trash. The big thing is this is the first of what is a big post-Labor Day window. So we have figure pricing tonight there in the blockchain space. Tomorrow we'll have 4 different deals in kind of a scattershot of industries pricing. And then next week, the big one will be Netscope, followed by StubHub. So we're seeing kind of a broadening out of deals. The big thing when I talk to bankers, though, we saw the 25 times oversubscription numbers on Klarna. How much of those orders are real, and how much momentum can be able to be showing up in the aftermarket performance and really going forward? Again, as Joe mentioned, this thing opened at 52, traded to 57.20, and is now back near 48. So a little bit volatile, but really the days after the day one trade are what really matters the most.
Billy, Goldman Sachs has been on a tear lately. We had a big move yesterday, speaking to the trend that you're talking about. If this pipeline continues to be stuffed with new issues, what does it mean for these investment banks?
It's money in the bank, Joe. And the big thing, though, is you want to orchestrate these deals. So Goldman Sachs, I believe, is leading 4 or 5 of these deals. So they're having a front and center kind of role in this window of new issuance. The big question is, what banks show up and how much are they going to want to push on price potentially? We've seen a number of these deals start with a lower valuation, a lower share price, and walk investors through that pricing dynamic. So it'll be key to watch that.
Bailey, I love that we've been watching Klarna for such a long time, because I know the dynamic in Europe has really been a lot of scrutiny on Klarna to list within Europe, given it's a Swedish company. Do you see this trend of more European companies flocking to New York rather than staying on the other side of the Atlantic?
Yeah, we've been seeing this really for, call it 2 years at this point. And when you talk to bankers and investors, the U.S. is deeper. It's more liquid. And for most of these companies, they're willing to, U.S. investors or investors that are investing in U.S. markets are willing to ascribe a greater valuation in terms of price to earnings, price to sales, EV to EBITDA, whatever multiple you're using. It continues to play out when you really look at some of the deal flow. We've been seeing boom times in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia. U.S. is coming back. Europe really is being left behind. So the big question is, how are they going to, A, get more companies out the door, and B, to your point, are they going to be able to be successful in keeping some of these darlings, some of these bigger companies in the tech space listing on their bourses?
Well, it's great to have you with us here, Bailey, as the trading gets underway just this hour. Bailey Lipschultz live from World Headquarters in New York. We'll keep tabs on Klarna for you as we make our way through the afternoon. Bloomberg Business Week Daily will have much more after the top of the hour at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and Charlie Pellet will be hitting this, of course, in his newscasts over the next couple of hours here. Remarkable story overseas breaking out in Poland. This emerged late yesterday as NATO fighter jets were forced to shut down Russian drones, a swarm of Russian drones that violated Poland's airspace, just as Russia was attacking targets in Ukraine. NATO officials, Poland's military, reporting this Wednesday a rare clash, realizing these were unmanned drones between Moscow and militaries from NATO. We did hear from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on the Poland attack. Let's listen to what he said.
The North Atlantic Council met this morning and discussed the situation in light of Poland's request for consultations under Article 4 of the Washington Treaty. Allies expressed solidarity with Poland and denounced Russia's reckless behavior. A full assessment of the incident is ongoing. What is clear is that the violation last night is not an isolated incident.
Rutte said Polish F-16s, Dutch F-35s, Italian AWACS surveillance aircraft were all involved in responding to the breach of Polish airspace With us now to talk about this and other hotspots in the world is Michael Allen, Managing Director at Beacon Global Strategies, former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush in the national security sector. Michael, it's great to have you. Here we go again with a new area of concern and realizing that Vladimir Putin likes to push the line here a little bit, but we're invoking in Article 4. What does that mean for the state of NATO, and what did Vladimir Putin just do?
Well, this is a very serious incursion by the Russians. I think it is designed to test NATO's resolve. And we also have to look at the context that we're in. We are, and seemingly Trump is more frustrated with the Russians of late. We're looking at what do security guarantees look like? Does that include a Western tripwire force inside of Ukraine, something that Vladimir Putin has warned us against doing? And we're also apparently getting more serious about sanctions. So I think what they're trying to do, Putin in particular, is to warn us of the dangers of confrontation, to intimidate us, and to fracture our resolve. That's got to be what he's after right now, because I think he feels rather defensive because he sees Trump seemingly realizing that they're disrespecting the United States and turning on us.
The United States is part of NATO, in theory. There is a question lately, as the U.S. starts to pull some of the security aid in Eastern European countries that border Russia, about just how tight that resolve is. What does Donald Trump do next?
I think this is where the rubber's going to meet the road. You've heard Trump in years past insist that NATO begin to pay their fair share. Trump won that at the beginning of his term, so I think he's flipped a little bit. I don't think he wants to get out of NATO. I think he wants to see the Europeans step up. He feels like this is something he's achieved already as part of his national security foreign policy. But this is just the type of exigency that the Russians are trying to test us with, which is, do faraway items or incursions or attacks, does that implicate U.S. national security? Should it? Should American soldiers be involved in this type of work? That's the type of debate he wants to provoke here within the United States, because he knows we have sort of neo-isolationist sentiment right now, doubting about America's role in the world.
The reaction from at least one Republican on Capitol Hill, Joe Wilson of South Carolina, posted on X, Russia is attacking NATO ally Poland with Iranian drones less than a week after the president hosted the Polish president at the White House. This is an act of war. Is that how you see this?
No, I don't want. We need to see if this continues, and we need to. I mean, obviously, we need to take it seriously. But calling it an act of war, I think, goes way too far.
It's hard to back up from that, isn't it?
It's hard to. There's no other place to go. That suggests that we need to hit back militarily immediately. I don't think that's right at all. Let's see if this is part of a larger aggressive pattern. They have had minor incursions in the past. I think this is the most major of them. Let's see where this goes. There's no doubt that people are signaling to the Russians today, easy, be careful, don't provoke us, you can't win this, but let's see if this continues.
Where do the Europeans go from this? Emmanuel Macron, Giorgia Meloni, Friedrich Merz, I should say. What are they thinking right now?
I think they're thinking this renews the spirit and the conviction that we developed at the beginning of the second Trump administration, that we really need to spend more, revitalize our defense industrial base, and have greater agency over our own security within Europe, because Russia is aggressive. Even if the United States isn't trying to back away from Europe, which I think we are even under Trump, if not getting out of NATO, I think they're thinking to themselves, this is a serious situation, this is going to continue, and we have got to pay more and do more in service of our own security.
It sounds like the president is wondering exactly what this means as well. He posted on Truth Social, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go, exclamation point." I don't know where we're going there, Michael, but there are questions about where we're going with Israel as well. After striking Doha, targets in Doha yesterday, where the actual negotiators were and the largest U.S. base in the Middle East is located. The president has made clear that he's angry about it. He posted on Truth Social, "Not a decision made by me." What does he do with Benjamin Netanyahu on this one?
Well, I think he's frustrated with Netanyahu because Trump feels like he's getting closer to a hostage deal. He had just put out a big tweet on Sunday afternoon saying, Israel's agreed to a certain set of criteria. Now it's Hamas's turn. And I think he sees what Netanyahu is doing is boat rocking. It's not that it should be completely surprising that the Israelis are engaging in yet another decapitation strike of a leadership target in a terrorist organization. But this was a little bit surprising, the timing of it all. Yeah. The United States is in the harness trying to negotiate a good deal. I understand we had a terrorist attack in Jerusalem authored by Hamas the day before the attack, but still, this just feels like it's something that's testing the president's patience at a moment when Israel ought to be looking of how are we going to settle this down, but they're clearly not. At least Netanyahu's clearly not in that frame of mind.
There are very few places in the Middle East where ceasefire negotiations can actually happen with actual representatives of Hamas. Doha is one of the very few places where that can occur. Is this a message that a ceasefire is ultimately off the table or not doable?
It possibly, but there's another way to look at it too, which is I think that the Israelis have been frustrated throughout that they're negotiating with people who are in luxury hotels in a faraway city from Hamas. I think they have felt that if they were negotiating with someone inside of Gaza who was suffering, who was under pressure, who was dodging bullets and bombs, that they may be more conditioned to compromise sooner than the political leadership who have nothing to do with the wartime instruments inside of Gaza. So maybe there's an argument in the medium term that as long as you're taking hardliners off the chessboard, maybe this will be easier to get from A to B.
What do you make of the lack of notification? The reporting from Axios makes you wonder that the U.S. actually saw Israeli aircraft on the move, inquired, and we were told the missiles had already been launched. That's not the way this is supposed to work, is it?
You would think that we would have had we would have moved more in concert on this. The Israelis must have known that Trump wasn't going to like this very much. Even if we don't like it, I didn't like the suggestion of the United States saying we're going to call Qatar and warn them this is coming. To me, that's not what it was appropriate in this type of situation.
So we shouldn't have expected that call.
Well, I think now the Israelis are thinking it's smart that we didn't do that call because we can't necessarily trust the White House to keep it to ourselves. I mean, if they're telling us something in confidence and we're saying we'll go call the targets of the bomb, I don't know. That doesn't feel right to me.
Should we be bracing for fallout from Iran, from the Houthis, from Lebanon? What are the ripple effects here?
So Iran, I think, is still trying to figure out what weapons they do have. I know they're going to bounce back sooner or later with their proxy forces. I don't know that they're ready yet. I still think Hezbollah is on its back foot. If anything happens, I think it would come from the Houthi. There might be a longer-term implication for bombing Doha that the Israelis will have to press. But, you know, as the Israelis are fond of saying, they have 7 fronts ongoing in their wars within the Middle East. And they have to keep their enemies sort of on their back foot.
Yeah. It's great to have you back, Michael. Don't be a stranger. Michael Allen, always with interesting thoughts from Beacon Global Strategies. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll point you to the late edition of Balance of Power. Senator Mike Rounds will be joining Kriti and I. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll distill what else has happened today in the Capitol. Alongside Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Mathieu. We'll see you back here a couple hours, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.